Hello, welcome to another week in the books. This week we are back to the normal stuff. I'm gonna tell you what I actually read this week because our visitors went home last weekend, so it's been back to the normal stuff around here. I just have to get my Goodreads pulled up. Also, this morning I'm just shaking my head at the weather because we're in Germany. There have been warm days, it's June, and I woke up and needed a sweater. It's just funny to me. Anyway, let me get my Goodreads and then we'll get to talking. Alright, first up, I just have to quick tell you about a book that I decided to DNF. I was slowly making progress throughout the whole month of May, and then I just decided I wasn't really enjoying it. It wasn't really engaging, so I set it aside, gave up on it for now. And that was a book called Johnny U, which I mentioned at the beginning of May that I had just started. And it was a biography, sports biography about a pretty famous quarterback named Johnny Unitas. And if sports literature, sports biography, sports history, if you love that kind of stuff, and especially if you love football, American football, maybe you'd find this more engaging and interesting than I did. I just didn't think that the craftsmanship level was super great, and the way that the story was being told, I was like, this just isn't really engaging for me. This isn't doing what I thought it would do. This isn't hooking me in with a cool story. And I know that it's a biography, and sometimes biographies are just not as thrilling as, say, a mystery plot, obviously. But I wasn't really enjoying it, so I wasn't going to make myself suffer because I'm already doing that with War and Peace, and I have to do that for a project. So that's this book, my second DNF for the year, Johnny U. U for unfortunate. Next up is Among the Hidden, which is the first in the series The Shadow Children. And this was a reread for me. I first read it when I was in the 4th grade and picked it up again now because my friend and I are reading it for our podcast, The Nemesis Files. We wanted to revisit something from our childhood, so this is what got picked. And while I liked my reread of this story, I didn't quite love it as much as 4th grade me did. Because back then I was reading everything in the series and couldn't get my hands on it fast enough. Versus now, I liked it enough, but I will not be reading any more in this series. But what we have here is a dystopian plot, and it features Luke. He's our protagonist. He's a 12-year-old boy, and he is a third-born child in a world where people are only allowed to have 2 kids. So that's an issue. And all his life, up until the start of the story, he hasn't really been terribly affected by the status of him being a third-born child, and how if he was discovered and found out, that would be a really bad thing, because his family has a farm and they've got woods around their house, so he's had some relative freedom, helping out in the garden, running around in the trees. And then at the start of the story, that all changes because the government buys up the land and starts cutting down the forest, so that way they can build like a neighborhood there, and people of a higher status than Luke's family are moving into these really nice houses they're building. So obviously a problem if you don't want anyone to discover that you have an illegal third kid. And he is confined to his attic room, which sounds as awful as it is, but while he's up there, he's peering through a vent that kind of helps him see out into some of the neighborhood, and in the house next door, he spies a face in a window, and he knows for a fact that that house already has 2 sons, and he also knows for a fact that those 2 kids are at school. So he's like, I think they have a third-born child in that house. And of course, for the plot and the story, you know, he goes and investigates, and then he starts learning things about the truth behind what happened as far as a drought, food shortage, mismanagement of resources by the government, things that happened that brought about this legislation and the laws being passed where people could only have 2 kids. and he's sorting through, what is truth and what is propaganda. And then also he has to face a choice of, what do I do with myself? Because there's a crossroads in this story that's reached of essentially one way is Luke staying in his attic bedroom for the rest of his life, essentially. And then the other way is getting a fake ID and figuring out if there's something else that he can do with his existence. So he's got to choose. You see some interesting things unfolding in this first installment of the series, which for a first book in a series, I thought it was really good, but things were just a little too vague. So didn't love it, but I liked it. I won't be reading anymore, but if you want to hear me and my friend talk more in depth about it, you can catch it on an upcoming episode of our podcast, The Nemesis Files, on Spotify. So we'll discuss this more, and I'm looking forward to hearing his thoughts. Next up is 1965, The Most Revolutionary Year in Music. This is a non-fiction book that is obviously about music. It's also about different cultural and current events of that time that were in conversation with music that was being put out, lyrics that were being written, and just what bands and artists were up to when they weren't in the studio making music. Because there was a lot of conversation and a lot of stuff going on with LSD and weed and how that impacted either the writing process for musicians or trouble that they ran into. So this is set up as one long year of music, 1965, but broken down into winter, spring, summer, and fall. And so each section you look at what songs were coming out, what new things were happening as far as sound is going, as tools and technology changed with making music, or maybe someone used a new instrument in making a song that then inspired someone else to use it in their music. You see that through the year. And then you also see, like I was saying, the current events that sometimes impacted what lyrics were being written. So a lot was happening in the world in 1965 as far as Vietnam was occurring and getting started. You had the civil rights movement really, really doing a lot of stuff across the United States. And this book primarily focused on America and the UK, and like the UK British invasion with music and pop stars. And a lot was really in conversation. You had also the pill and changes with like the sexual revolution and people's views on premarital sex and how that was ending up in lyrics and what people could get away with saying at the time, which wasn't a lot, mind you. It's interesting to me, I kept comparing music of today with like what was okay back in 1965. And like, for instance, there was one artist who sang about a young woman going up to his apartment with him, and a radio station would not play it because they were like, that's too risque. You're clearly alluding to the fact that you guys are about to go have sex. Versus you look at music today and everyone's saying everything, in 1965 to me was not that long ago. So that seems like a lot of change with as far as what musicians are allowed to say in songs and still be played on the radio. Like, a lot of change in a short amount of time. And you primarily get a look at the Beatles, the Stones, the Supremes, the Beach Boys, the Byrds, the Turtles. Those bands pop up again and again and again, but then you get, some information about James Brown or Otis Redding or the Mamas and the Papas. So they're sprinkled in other bands and other musicians other than just like the big ones at the time. But I would say there are repeat customers here of who you hear about the most, and the Beatles and the Stones are definitely at the top. And I think that if you're a music lover, you would definitely enjoy this book. This is a very niche look at a particular year. But if you're just a general history lover, or you're looking for a nonfiction that's interesting, I'd say this could be for you too, because it did keep me engaged. I did find it interesting, and it was a fairly quick read. So I do recommend this one. last up is The House of Doors, which is a historical fiction. This has multiple POVs and it bounces between a couple different years in history. It primarily spends time in 1921 and 1910 in Penang, and the main characters are Leslie and Somerset Maugham, who they call Willie. Somerset Maugham was a real author and really popular at that time, and he's a friend of Leslie's husband. So Leslie and her husband are hosting both Willie and then Willie's secretary / lover Gerald. And there's some pieces that you sort of catch on to quickly at the beginning of the story, that there's a rift between Leslie and her husband, but then also not everything is going well in Willie's personal life. And so you've got those things at play. And then to build on that, Leslie starts telling Willie a story about an event that happened back in 1910 with Leslie's friend Ethel, and Ethel being accused of murder after defending herself from being raped. And so there's a murder trial that you are getting the details of and the drama of. And then also back in 1910, there was a Chinese revolutionary in the city of Penang trying to raise funds for what he's trying to do in China. And all of this stuff is just interwoven together. There's a lot of stuff going on, but it's interesting stuff as far as like the revolutionary and the murder trial. And then it's like Leslie is witness to it all, and she's telling it all to Willie as the writer, who's like going to write about it for his next book potentially. And I think if it had just been about the drama that was happening in Leslie and Willie's personal lives, that this wouldn't have been as engaging and good of a story, because their drama was just kind of slice of life and ho-hum. But the murder trial, which is based on a real murder trial that happened in Penang, if you look up Somerset Maugham's story, The Cassowary Tree, I believe it's called, or if you look up the movie The Letter with Betty Davis, that is based on, maybe it's his play. I think it's his play it's based on. There's a real murder trial about this woman who killed a man because she was defending herself from being assaulted. And of course the book plays that up and takes some artistic license as far as like what really happened with that night of the murder and the relationship between Ethel and the man she murdered, and all that stuff, the drama. But it wasn't like fabricated drama for drama's sake. I actually thought it was like, oh, this is compelling and there's layers to this and that makes it interesting and I want to know more. So it was interesting and engaging, I'll say that. And I didn't expect to enjoy this as much as I did, because I just picked it up on a whim from the library. I saw the cover and generally read the synopsis, and I was like, yeah, sure, this sounds interesting. And then I just thought that it moved at a good pace. I thought that Leslie and Willie were fairly good narrators and POVs, and the voice of it and then how it was wrapped up and concluded just felt really balanced. I liked what was going on as far as the craftsmanship. So I enjoyed this one. It got 4 stars for me on Goodreads out of 5, so that says something. But if you are interested in the author Somerset Maugham, you might be interested in this one. If you like historical fiction that's got multi-POV, you might like this. It's got that touch of tension and mystery with the murder trial. So lots of interesting things being woven together in this one. That's all I have for this week. Thank you again for being here. Before I let you go, I have 2 things that I want to say. One is, if you have any book recommendations for me, please do send those along. I am always taking book recommendations. And then the second thing is, don't forget to check out the podcast I co-host with my friend, The Nemesis Files. If you like my reviews on here and you want something more, or you want a more deep dive into books, that is exactly what my friend and I do. We just do 1 book per episode, and we dive into themes and characters and insights we think we've picked up on. So do check that out. It's free on Spotify, and new episodes come out weekly. And again, thank you for being here, and I'll catch you next week.